video button instead
Yeah.
of the camera.
Yeah.
That would
See
take a
it
picture.
recording time now?
So John, all right. So you talked about how being from Connecticut is part of the reason why you're a Democrat.
Yes. I think that, everybody's upbringing influences on what they think. And I grew up, my parents were Democrats. In Connecticut, when I was a child, wasn't necessarily a hard blue state. There were certainly parts of that state, and still are in the western side, plenty of conservative pockets. In fact, the town I grew up in was 70% Republican.
Wow.
But I think that the things that were going on in the country were more influential than the things that were just going on in my state at the time. Uh, I got involved with politics, or interested in politics during the Watergate years, and was really turned on to politics when Jimmy Carter came on the scene. I just loved how he spoke and the things he talked about, and it really caught fire in me on what he represented.
Um, what would you say to Republicans I meet who want to know how someone can be a Christian and a Democrat?
Well, the short answer is how can a person be a Republican and a Christian? Um, but I guess the question can go either way. And why can't they be interchangeable? Um, I'm a Christian Democrat because I believe that the Democratic Party represents the um, things I believe in Christ calls me to be. Christ was a man of compassion, and he calls us to be charitable and loving and accepting, and he teaches us to take care of the poor and the widow and the orphan, and to um, honor our parents and do that through how we represent them in communities. He taught us how to take care of the foreigner who and to love our enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see that as much in the Republican Party as I do the Democratic Party. Now, the Democratic Party doesn't cloak it in Christian jargon, but they certainly represent those values by being an inclusive and compassionate party towards the people that have less than the people that have more. I don't consider them um, the party that they're painted to be of just take from the rich and give to the poor. I think that that is a misnomer. But they are a party that certainly has compassion for people's views, lifestyles, and for their circumstances. And so I don't see the Republican Party representing that. I see them as being a party that wants to leave everybody to fend for themselves while they're tilting the scales towards the rich and the powerful,
Mm-hmm.
which makes it impossible for the rest of us to ever have a fighting chance.
Well, this, a little bit about my story. I've never voted for a presidential candidate who has been elected yet. I've voted for John Kerry, John McCain, Mitt Romney, and written in Ben Carson. Um, it seems to be because the Electoral College determines which candidate is elected instead of the popular vote. You said something interesting to me one time that that's because the U.S. is not a democracy; we're a republic.
Well, that's true. And I mean, you could do a whole history lesson on the difference between democracy and republic. But the biggest one is we do not elect people by popular vote. We have a system that's been put in place since the beginning that is based on the amount of people that are in our Congress. And that electoral college is what, in fact, elects our presidents. We are not a national election system. We are 50 individual states, and each state has so many electoral votes. Those votes have varied over history because it follows the population. So, for example, as Florida has become more populous with the immigration of people from the north to the south over the last 20 years, they have picked up electoral votes. Texas has picked up electoral votes. California represents the largest electoral voting bloc in the country.
Mhm.
And then many other states where people have left, i.e., Connecticut, that used to have 6 electoral votes and only has fewer than that now, is because they've lost population. So, although the system isn't perfect, that's the same one we've worked under for 200 plus years. And I don't see that changing in any time soon.
I was liberal going into college, but my parents are liberal Democrats. Um, but my own political views became more conservative because my campus pastor was very conservative. He told us about the process of abortions, and I realized that because I was adopted, I could have been aborted, but my birth mother didn't abort me.
Well, and I think abortion is unfortunately used as a political issue more than a real issue. In fact, it was not a position that the Republican Party even had taken until the early 70s after Roe v. Wade was passed
Mhm.
by a Republican Supreme Court by a 7-2 decision, which was dominated by Republicans at the time. And so even the Supreme Court didn't look at it as a political situation. They based it on the evidence that they had before them. However, even when the Republican Party first came out with the position of quote unquote pro life, they always had the exception for circumstances of the life of the mother or other circumstances.
Mhm.
And now it seems they don't even allow those positions. The biggest concern for me is what is pro-life, because being anti-abortion doesn't necessarily equate being pro-life, because if you are pro-life, you're for all life. And why is it that the Republican Party has such a hard stance on what a woman can or cannot do until the birth of that child, but then want to provide no social, educational, or financial structure for a single mom of 3 to survive? They don't back fair labor laws where people are able to make a working living so they can support their families. They don't want to provide universal health care so that everybody is being able to live a healthy life. They don't want to cover the veterans. They don't want to work with the disabled.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be able to leave everybody to fend for themselves, which I don't find very Christian at all. So, and the biggest thing is pretty much every pro-life Republican I know is also pro-death penalty, which is the ultimate anti-life legislation that you could pass. So there's a kind of a contradiction there. And I've always said that hashtag anti-choice does not equal pro-life.
John, you mentioned veterans, and to play the devil's advocate a little bit, you know, in my mind, I think of Republicans being, um, you know, saying that they're going to, you know, being the party that supports veterans. And I think President Trump, one of his um, campaign promises was he was going to take care of the vets.
Republicans have been promising taking care of veterans forever. During the Obama administration, there was at least 8 bills that were pushed through Congress to help improve veterans' lives, and the Republican Party voted against every one of them. They are really good at supporting our military, but they're not as good at supporting our veterans. I think if you ask each individual politician in either party, they all are pro-veteran. But the legislative voting record shows that they just don't. I know that right now Trump is touting how they just signed into law the expansion of the Veterans Choice Program, which I am a part of, and it's an abomination. It's really no choice because private doctors don't want to be involved with it because it takes an act of Congress to get approved to use the choice program. And so even though they've expanded in the choice program by dropping some of the restrictions, they've alienated so many private doctors, and it's so hard to be paid by by the VA for the doctors that they don't want to participate in it. So fixing a flawed system is not really the answer, but I'll give them that one, that it was an effort.
Okay. Well, speaking of Trump, he being president has caused my political views to become more moderate again. Governor John Kasich said in his recent debate with Bernie Sanders that Republicans care more about their party than what's best for the country. He also said Republicans can't go high, which might be related to Michelle Obama's comment, when they go low, we go high. Any thoughts or comments about either of those?
Well, I think a lot of pundits and people a lot smarter than me will agree that Trump is not a conservative. Trump is an opportunist. In fact, he was a hardcore New York liberal for most of his life. He was in pro-choice. He was in favor of universal single-payer health care. At least he spoke about it for many years. And his lifestyle shows that he was a hardcore New York liberal. By the friends he kept and by the company that he associated with. He joined the Republican Party, I believe, because he thought it was the safest and fastest path to the presidency. He saw an opportunity and he took advantage of it. He saw the anger in the country and he seized the opportunity. And although Bernie Sanders was doing it in similar ways with a different message, he didn't have that opportunity to follow it all the way through. I think we would have had a very different election process if it was those two running against each other.
Yeah, it seems like, and you know what? From an entertainment standpoint, it would have been, you have to admit, John, that it would have been really entertaining to see a Bernie-Trump debate.
Oh, I think it definitely would have been a really interesting thing to watch. Bernie is, if nothing else, a disciplined man and sticks to message no matter where he is. But he was really touching on some social issues that mean a lot to the people of this country. I think Trump touched on a lot of those issues as well, but he had no intention of following through with them. He talked about the common man and what he was going to do for them by draining the swamp. He has not drained the swamp. He's filled it with more monsters. He's got 3 Goldman Sachs representatives in his cabinet. He's got military men in positions that are traditionally held by civilians in his cabinet. And none of those military men are bad men, bar Michael Flynn,
right,
which he was warned not to hire
by President Obama, yeah.
And there's a reason why he was fired by the last administration, and he should have adhered to those things. Those military men are all good, well-experienced military men, but they should not be in civilian positions. There's a reason why the country keeps civilian and military separate, and that's because the civilians must always have power over the military. Mm-hmm. That is something that our founding fathers believed in wholeheartedly. But I also believe that, he won because the Clinton campaign ran a terrible campaign. I think that the untimely release of WikiLeaks emails, which was all propaganda as far as I'm concerned, the Benghazi trials that were just a witch hunt, the FBI director sticking his mouth in places it shouldn't have been, created it. But the campaign just ran a horrible campaign because they basically said, don't elect him, he's not good. They never really presented a positive view of where they wanted to go. And so people went with the outsider. Mm-hmm. And now they've got to deal with that for the next 4 years. And I think we have seen evidence over the last 200 days that we're in a heap of trouble. And it's coming out now that what was smoke at the beginning, that there was possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, is quickly becoming signs of a fire. Um, they can't cover up their stories fast enough. They keep amending their stories, and it gets worse and worse, seemingly day by day. And I think at some point, when all these investigations are done, it's all going to come out that there was a whole lot of backroom dealing that borders on treason.
Well, I just see it as if an average citizen like me can tell that there's been collusion with Russia, who, by the way, are not our ally, then I just think it's obvious if an average citizen like me can tell that there's been collusion, that there has been.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think that it doesn't matter who you colluded with, if Germany, Great Britain, or France, or any other person representing any of our allies had approached either party and said, we have dirt on the other candidate, I think it should have been a red flag to that person. But to have it be Russia, a country that we have been in opposition from for decades, since the end of World War II, I think is kind of a real smack in the face to the American citizens. And although Korea and China may be a bigger threat momentarily, historically, Russia has been our number one adversary. And I know that the president had said that, anybody would have done it. Anybody would have taken the meeting to hear what was going to be given. Well, that's not true. Just in 2000, Al Gore's team found an opposition book from the Bush campaign. And what did they do? They called the FBI and turned it in. They didn't use it against him. And there's been other campaigns throughout history where things have come up and they've said no. I remember back in the 60s hearing about the Johnson Goldwater campaign of 64. And there was some stuff going on in the Johnson campaign that was definitely underhanded, and the Goldwater campaign knew about it. And his team wanted to use that against Johnson, and Goldwater said, no, I am not going to smear this man's name. He is a hard-working, dedicated servant, and I'm not going to use that stuff to smear him. Probably would have won him the election. But people had an ethical standard to hold that doesn't seem to have mattered in this instance.
You mentioned Al Gore, and I just want to jump in and say that when I was living in China when I was in 5th grade, Al Gore came to the U.S. Embassy, and if I had been old enough to vote, I probably would have voted for him.
I like Al Gore, and although when he first became vice president, I was a Jerry Brown man in the '92 campaign, and but I liked the selection of him as vice president. I supported him when he ran for president. I voted for him, and he won the popular vote as president. But unfortunately, back to the Electoral College. Electoral colleges rule over popular vote, and so do brothers that are governors of a very rich state.
I just want to confess that I don't pray for our president, for President Trump, and for our leaders, our government officials at every level in both political parties as often as I should. I know that in Romans, like God's word commands us to and commands me to as a Christian.
Well, I pray daily that we are a continuing successful country. I wish that God would touch the hearts of all politicians and turn them towards the compassion of Christ and away from political agenda in both parties. I pray that Trump gets saved. I pray that the people that are saved in his administration, and there are a few, stand up for the values of Jesus Christ and not use them to manipulate the political system. I ask that for those that are doing harm, be exposed, and that's not a bad thing to pray for, because if there are people out to hurt this country for their own personal gain, I pray that God expose that. All things that are done in the dark should be come to the light.
And will come to the light
and
eventually.
Will come to the light eventually. And I'm living proof of that. And so I do pray. It may not be the prayer that some people want me to pray, but I think that is a fair and equitable prayer.
Well, John, ultimately God has given the church the tools the spiritual authority and the responsibility to solve the country's social issues, not government. As Chip Ingram writes in his book, Culture Shock, the government can only do so much: administer justice and restrain evil.
Well, the responsibilities of the faith community is a very different discussion than the responsibilities of the civic and political communities. One, I am a firm believer in separation of church and state, and we are not a Christian nation. We are a pluralistic nation. And that means that everybody's religious views are equally respected. But being a Christian, I know what God calls us to be. And the church, us, not the buildings, are responsible to care for our neighbors. But the church itself cannot do that until the people of the church get more engaged. Mm-hmm. If they live up to what they're called to do. Point given here is statistics show that only 2% of regular attenders at church tithe. If 100% of people, let's say if only 50% of the people tithed, the things the church could do to help society would overwhelm. We wouldn't need social services from the government. We could probably help solve some of the health crises. We could help solve homelessness and hunger. We could help retrain people to get better jobs. Because if everybody was tithing to the church would have so many resources that they could make available to people, then they would be the ones taking care of it. And then government could concentrate on the things that we need government for, which is to protect our borders and pave our highways and deliver our mail and make sure that people aren't, taking advantage of other people through enforcement, and making sure that our labor laws are fair and giving us equal representation for taxation, and leaving the social programs to the church where it should be. But that's not the world we live in. Mm-hmm. So we have to depend on our government, because we cannot do it as individuals, because we're only as strong as our weakest link. And there are a lot of people in this country hurting. Okay. And they need people's help.
Is there anything you want to promote?
I just want to promote that people should be involved. If you have a political opinion, you should have political activism. Vote. Not enough people in this country vote. Too many decisions are made by the minority in this country because most of us sit home on election day. Run for something. If you don't like what's happening, get involved that way. Get involved with a civic organization or a social organization. Get involved with your schools, because change happens in those places as well as it does in the legislative buildings. And if you are a person of God, get involved with your church. And I'm not just talking about serving on Sunday service. Go out and be the church. Get involved with community things as a representative of the church. Go help with a shelter. Go feed a person. Clothe a person, make a difference that way, because really that's what matters, is the daily things that we do that show the compassion of Christ. That's what I want to promote.
Is there anything you want to say to our viewers in closing?
Just thank you for this time. Continue to listen, share it with your friends. Let's triple the viewers. And
yes, please.
And really just, hear what we just talked about and look into it, because it's just my opinion. And I hope I have good opinions, but not everything I say is fact. So do your homework. As I say from the pulpit, just because I preach it doesn't mean that it's gospel truth, because sometimes man's nature and opinion gets involved with the things said from the pulpit. So do your fact checking, do your homework.
Well, John, I want to thank you for your time. And even though the statements you and I have made are opinions, I think this could go either one of two ways. Either people who watch this are going to be fact check. That's a hard word to say. or nobody's going to reply to this, which usually happens, but I'm okay with it. I think it's okay either way, and I appreciate viewers watching this, whether they fact check us or they don't reply at all. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who have opinions as well.
Amen to that. And Facebook Live them and put them in your comments.
Thank you for your time, John.
Thank you for the interview.
And to everyone who's going to watch this, thank you for watching. And until next time, I'm Matt Levely saying, I'm not going to be lectured by you, John. Ossoff.